That's probably the main thing I've learned from him when it comes to podcasting about like, hey, you want to take this seriously, you really got to do your homework, and if something important happens, you got to make sure you jot everything down. You actually have like a real agenda when it comes to that.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy, Tom Talks Rush, and stand back with another video. This time, I'm joined by the one and only Joshua Moreira from True Hill Heat. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So if we take this back to the very beginning, before any of your work with True Hill Heat, where do you first discover wrestling as an overall fan?
As an overall fan, I want to say probably around, I want to say maybe like around WrestleMania 11 when that event happened. Just because like I very remember a lot of certain things as a kid. Um, the most WrestleMania that I remember was probably the year later, WrestleMania 12. That was the one I remember. So I think from what I remember, like that was around the time I started becoming a fan.
Mm. So you talked about WrestleMania 12 and WrestleMania 11 there. Do you remember where you were when you first discovered them and how you might have first discovered them?
I was definitely I was still living I was with my parents. I remember that. I'm trying to remember exactly. That's a good question. Um it's bringing back a lot of memories. I think I had to do probably my grandparents' house. I remember like when they used to have because they used to have cable. We didn't have cable for a couple of years when I was a kid. So basically from like being at my grandparents' house, that's how I basically discovered wrestling. Watching regularly from there, and that's how I actually became a fan.
So you talked about there your grandparents being the ones to help you discover wrestling. Were they fans first of all, or was it sort of the thing where they were watching something else and you would see wrestling because of that?
I think it was more so just I don't think they were fans. I think it was just more so like they were just there. Like I guess wherever we were watching, that's where we were watching at the time. Yeah, but I for the most part I don't think they were wrestling fans.
Mm. So when it comes to when you've discovered wrestling through WrestleMania 11 and 12, are you how do you start consuming the content? Are you a are you like a video store guy? Do you sort of beg your parents to get cable so you can watch things? How does it work?
Yeah, mostly it was that. It was well, I think once I realized cable TV had actual channels, I think in general that's how I felt. I was like, for them to get us cable, and it finally like when it transpired, that's how I was able to watch a lot of the WWF stuff. Later on, I also remember watching WCW, the Monday Night Wars, and I remember
Mm,
like going back and forth watching both shows.
mm. So do you remember a moment you talked about there going back and forth? Do you remember a moment that maybe you said, I'm going to start with WCW for the night? And then you maybe were like, you heard through friends or a moment where you were like, I've got to switch over. This is happening. Or vice versa with either show.
I think with WCW was basically because of the stuff that was going on with the NWO.
Mm,
So that was always something that was kind of, I guess, as a kid, that was kind of fun to see because we seen a bunch of bad guys on TV. So you always wanted to see the faces to win their matches every time they faced the NWO. But then also I remember back then, um, WCW used to start an hour early,
mm,
so it was always something I was like, all right, I'll watch the first hour of Monday Nitro, and then once Monday Night Raw starts, I'll start watching Raw. And I remember as a kid, I wasn't really able to watch like the last hour of Raw because it was on so late. So by the time the show finished, I had to go to bed. So that's what I also remember as well.
mm. So when it comes to, do you remember any moments that you were like, okay, I'm glad I'm a fan at this point when it comes to the Monday Night Wars? And do you remember any moments that you were like, looking back now, you're like, how the hell did I like this?
Probably a lot. What kind of just made me stood a fan, I would say, during that time was WWE, the stuff they were doing with like The Rock and Stone Cold. Even though I was more of a Stone Cold guy than The Rock, that was one thing that kind of got me hooked. And then a lot of the stuff, like even now, like when I look back at it, like a lot of the stuff from the Attitude Era itself, when a lot of people come out and say like, "Oh, the Attitude Era was the best era of wrestling," and they would love to have that back or something like that. When I look back at it, I kind of question a lot of things. I'm like, "Oh, you sure you want this back?"
Mm,
Because realistically, I think the Attitude Era, what it was that the Attitude Era, they were living within its time. There was a lot of stuff that was edgy content. So the Attitude Era basically went along with that. And now when you look at it now, it's like, oh, maybe it wasn't so great. It's still entertaining, but it was like if you used to put that product out now, it wouldn't last very long.
no. So you talked about the Attitude Era and some of the moments not being so great. Do you remember a specific moment that you maybe go back and watch on a watch along or things like that, and you're like, ay, 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 how did they get away with this?
Yes, I don't. The one that stuck out the most to me was probably the Al Snow storyline with Big Boss Man,
Mm,
where Big Boss Man basically fed like his dog, and then they had the match. They had like that awful like
Kennel
cage
from Hell.
slash Hell in the Cell match. Yeah, I remember that. Oh, I remember that being so bad. Even at a young age, I remember like, oh, I had to ask like my brothers like, oh, what's going on? Like, I don't understand what's going on. Um, that was one of the things that I remember as a kid. Some of the stuff, like a lot of the stuff too, like what I always thought was real, like with the Undertaker, like a lot of his stuff, I
Mm,
always thought like all that stuff was like real. I remember that, and I remember that. I think it was a segment where Undertaker kidnapped Stone Cold, and I think he was talking about embalming him.
mm.
I remember that. I remember that. I remember. I thought that was real.
Oh, wow. So you talked about their thinking moments are real. Do you remember the moment that you realized, okay, wrestling's a show?
Probably, I probably as I got older, I know I started. One of my friends was the one that actually got me to Dirt Sheets. So like when I started finding out all the stuff about like wrestling being script and being, basically just being like what do you call that? Like a source of entertainment, like a
Mm,
TV show or anything. I wasn't taken back by it. I thought that was actually like a unique thing. So I think that's why I've always accepted wrestling for what it is now. Um, but yeah, like when I was a kid, when I started finding out these things, I got like more, and I actually got more interested
what
with those
was
kind of things. Surprisingly,
mm, what was it that made you more? Because you either go, I've found talking to people on this, you either go one way or the other. You're either not very interested, or you're like, nah, this isn't for me anymore. Or you're like your good self, you're like, "Ah, I want to know more about this. Why do you think you wanted to know more when it came to wrestling behind the scenes when you found out it was a show?
I think what it was just because like it was basically like a new source of wrestling. Like when you're a kid, you're just joining it as a fan. You know what I mean? Like you're just
Mm,
joining for the entertainment, knowing that not knowing everything that you know behind the scenes. So when I started finding out myself, I guess like what pulled me was like just not knowing and then going down that rabbit hole of like, oh, so these are things are script, and a lot of these guys actually are real friends. Like a lot of the faces and heels, oh, they're actually like real life friends, and some of the faces are actually not so nice people in real life.
mm,
And I always, for some reason, that always like drew me. Like I think that's why I've always stuck with that when it comes
mm,
to wrestling. I know there's a lot of people when I talk to now, like because I'm older now. When they hear like, oh, like you still watch wrestling? Oh, I stopped watching that stuff when I found out it was fake. But I mean, hindsight looking in, I mean, when people say that, I usually, I mean, I don't get taken back by it just because I know the process of it. I know what the performers have to do. It's one of those things that you still have to train. You're taking the bumps. It's still real in that aspect.
Mm,
It's just everything's just predetermined. That's the only difference when it comes to that.
mm. So obviously you talked about things like that and your fandom. Before we get into your work with True Hill Heat and how you joined the crew, etc., where would you say your current
Oh,
wrestling fandom is as we record this in uh, September of 2023?
um, when it comes to True Hill Heat, it's actually like actually I want to say a long story, but what happened was that I remember like around 2016, 2017, where I
Mm,
kind of started being more involved with like a lot of the wrestling groups, a lot of like the, Facebook, a lot of like the social media stuff. I
mm.
started being more involved with that. And from there, there was one of the groups who would do like kind of like a what do you call that? Like a viewing party. So they used to rent
Yeah, yeah,
out
watch
a
parties.
spot every pay-per-view. We used to hang out. Yeah, and we used to hang out and stuff like that. Um, and that's how I actually met some of the members from True Hill Heat from there. Um, and then around, I would say around 2017, that's actually where I became friends with Sid. It's funny because with SP3, me and him always didn't see eye to, like we didn't see eye to eye from the very beginning. It wasn't like we were friends like when we started off. That's what makes it funny. It had to do with like a thing that happened with him and Cody Rhodes, and he felt some type of way about Cody Rhodes, and basically that's how we actually got like that's actually how we became friends. Like a little bit more time after that, like I started to see how he is, a lot of stuff that he knew about, or like a lot of the knowledge that he had,
Mm,
which I was like, oh wow, like this guy really knows his stuff, and I was impressed. And from there, you know, we were friends. And then I know like he was running the brand, and I wasn't really part of like any brand or whatever you call that. Um, I did like some independent stuff, like some what do you call that? You could call it scouting for like one
freelancing?
of the something like that, yeah. Where like in New York City, there's like a few independent wrestling promotions. So there was one of them I worked for a while when it came to that around 2017, and then around 2018, I would say that's where I actually joined the brand. It was one of those things where I was like, I just asked them. I was like, hey, I would love to be part of what you guys are doing. I think there's potential here. And I think I could help out the best way I can with, just cleaning certain stuff up, and taking it more serious.
Mm,
And then around like I would say maybe about before summertime of 2018, that's when I joined the brand. I would run like their Facebook group. Um, when we started doing like the actual page for Facebook, like the actual, like the like page, I was also part of that. I was part of the administrative team for that, which I still am. Um, and then from there, everything just started building up from there. Like once we started taking the channel seriously, like when we started wanting to put more content for the channels, I would promote it. I would do the best that I can. And then around 20, I would say about 2021, that's when I started like being part of the channel. I was more like behind the scenes, like just, promoting,
yeah.
like I get just promoting and stuff. And then around 2021, that's when I started like joining in for certain things. I would like if somebody needed like a host or they needed an extra person, I would be that person. I would step in, and one of the things that took off was I would say the SummerSlam watch along we had. We had a SummerSlam watch along for 2021. That
Mm,
was the one that Roman Reigns main evented with John Cena. And that's where that one took off. We had about 15,000 views. And we kind of knew, we were like, oh, wow, I think we really do have something here. And that's when, SP3 wanted me on board for the channel, like when he wanted me as a regular for like whatever we're doing, like when it comes to watch alongs, whatever the case may be, whatever I could do, I would join. And when it comes to the main podcast, I usually fill in. Like if I'm available and somebody is doing something, I usually fill in for that as well.
Mm. So you talked about there filling in for certain podcasts. What is the podcast that True Hill Heat does, for example, that you're like, if that co-host wanted to step away, I'd be like, that'd be a fun show to talk about, for example.
Well, so what we do with the channel or like the podcast itself, we actually what SP3 does very well. He covers almost everything wrestling, which I
Mm,
mean like WWE news, AEW news, uh, any news from Impact, anything from New Japan. So there's a lot of brands that we do cover, and that's one of the unique things that I've noticed when I was like following other podcasts or where I listen to, um, based off like what fans do, like what fans come up with.
mm,
So that's one of the things that I've always noticed that he does very well. He takes it seriously. So there's
mm.
any news, like any little news, we would go through it. He will run down on it. Any major topics, that's what we basically discuss. We give our point of views on certain things. But yeah, it's like just an overall discussion within fans. That's basically what we do. Um, we started a segment a couple of months ago of like your matches of the week.
Yeah,
That's always a fun one because you have to think because we're watching so much wrestling that sometimes you have to think like, oh, what is my top five or top three? So that's probably the main thing that I think that's what makes us stick out is that we
mm,
cover a lot of bases when it comes to wrestling. Um, in general, what I notice with other podcasts, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, I do notice that sometimes they'll probably just cover like one company that they
yeah,
call themselves like a wrestling content creator or stuff like this, but they only cover one company. Which if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But I just think that if you're talking about the wrestling industry itself, it's a big industry, and I get it with WWE, they're the biggest, so that's given, but it's one of those things where it's like, hey, WWE is not the only
game
company
in
that's
town
that's
almost.
around. There's a lot of other stuff. There's a lot of talent around the industry that maybe a lot of people don't know about. So usually that's where we come in and we try to do our best. Because even some of the stuff, like even like if there's like some independent stuff, we try to cover it as well. Like if there's anything like we're sponsoring, we usually try to cover it. Or any like upcoming stars, like hey, this person, I think he could go to places and he might sign with any of the companies. Usually stuff like that we try to do as well.
Mm. So when it comes to you personally, what are some of your goals within the podcasting industry? Who do you want to work with in the wrestling media? And doesn't have to be True or Heat. Who do you want to work with? What do you want to do within the wrestling media and things like that?
Well, the wrestling media itself, that's a good question, actually. With the wrestling media itself, I think there's a few people I will love to like have discussions with. I think SRS is one guy on WhatsApp. I would love to have like just like a real discussion with him about the industry itself and what he's a fan of. Not only just about wrestling with him, but I know he follows like other stuff like UFC and all that good stuff outside of that. Um, and then with another person I would love to speak to as well, or you know, I don't know like how it would work or whatever the case may be is Brian Zane. He
Mm,
runs Wrestling with Regret. I think
mm,
he's really fantastic with the stuff that he does. He does like a lot of the reviews. He even does like a lot of like the past like wrestling reviews and stuff like that. And he really has some like great takes on it. So that's probably one person. That's probably the main person. I'll probably like, oh, I would love to either have him on the channel one day, or maybe even do something with him. I don't know. Like if I get to know him really well, if we have a good connection, we have a good chemistry. Who knows? Anything could happen.
mm. You talked about there anything can happen. who is someone, because I know you try and work with everyone within True Hill Heat. Who is someone that you're like, I don't work with them a lot. I'd love to do a podcast with them within the True Hill Heat community.
Oh, within the chili brand, um, besides SP3, probably Romeo. Uh, he's basically our tech guy. He's basically the guy that runs the ship, I would say. Um, he's probably one because he usually has like we don't always agree to certain things, but I think we have there's a mutual respect there that if I don't agree with something, we could have a discussion. And
Mm,
sometimes it could get off the rails. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes it could get crazy, but I think within like at the end of the day, we kind of know what lines to cross, what lines don't that we don't cross. Um, he's probably one person because I do the watch longs with him for the most part. But if we used to do like an actual podcast, probably him, probably Romeo.
mm. That's very cool. So you talked about podcasting there and watch alongs. The fact that you have to stay alert and sort of entertaining, for lack of a better word, you have to be entertaining the entire time on maybe a 3 hour watch along or a 2 hour podcast. What do you do to get yourself in that podcast mindset when it comes to, okay, I need to be in this mindset because I'm going to be on a show in a minute?
I usually just try to. I mean, you could say you try to block everything else out. It's easier said than done because there's so many moving parts. Like I could be trying to watch something that something happens or somebody's talking in the background or something's going on like in my house that kind of sometimes it could throw off my rhythm or whatever the case may be. Um, but yeah, usually I just try to stay focused, try to like remember like, all right, this is what we're doing tonight. Sometimes it could be hard. I'm telling you, like even when you try to watch, sometimes you try to engage. Sometimes I think it's okay. We can have like those down periods while we're doing the watch along because the shows are so long. Or like if there's commercial break, you could try to do something that's like, hey, step away real quick.
Mm,
Usually we still do that. Like we try to be open with that as well. I think sometimes one of the things that I learned as well is that sometimes you don't always need to speak. Because I know there's some guys who probably feel like, hey, it could be like like a minute or two period where we're not really saying nothing, we're paying attention, or there's a promo that's being cut and we want to listen to it. So sometimes it gets quiet. But I know there's guys who probably feel like, oh, and I've seen it myself that they feel like they need to say something. And it's like, no, guys, it's okay. We want to listen to what they're saying. And
mm.
after they finish their saying, then we could talk about it. We could give our takes off of that. Sometimes it's okay. If we want to watch something, you want to pay attention to it. I think that's also okay as well.
You talked about there wanting to watch something and things like that. How do you make sure that you're still a wrestling fan with everything you do as a creator? How do you avoid burnout as a wrestling fan?
Burnout as a wrestling fan. Sometimes what I do is like sometimes I just take uh I would take certain breaks. So say like if there's like a pay-per-view going on or like a watch long that's going on within like if there's a watch along for like WWE pay-per-view, anything like that, I usually try to pick and choose. I'm like, do I really want to come on tonight? Um, because there's days where I kind of just don't watch it at all. Like I don't watch wrestling. I try to, try to avoid it. For example, Saturday. Saturday, I didn't even watch Payback. So I don't know. Like I know the clips, I know what happened, but it was kind of exhausting per se because of what the news that happened that day. I think everybody
Mm,
knows the news that happened
yeah,
that
yeah.
day.
And they
And
probably
so it was
will by
kind
the
of
time this
yeah,
goes out. I won't lie.
yeah, yeah. And it was exhausting to be honest with you. And even when we were talking, he asked, Roy asked me like, "Hey, are you gonna join tonight?" I think I'm gonna take the night off. I was like, I think there's just too much going on, and so usually that's the best way I try to do it. I'd usually try to like pick a day because we do have like off days. So like, I'm not doing it every day. So that also helps as well. So the most part, I'm usually on Mondays and Wednesdays. So technically, for the most part, I'm on like 2 days a week. I would say like on an average where I'm on 2 days a week. So that
Mm,
that also helps a lot. But then also there's those days where something important might happen on SmackDown, so I might join in for Friday. Pay-per-view on Saturday, so I might join in for that. Sunday there's another pay-per-view, I might join in for that, or any like other special events. Sometimes they get exhausting, and sometimes I just pick. It comes to a point that sometimes I just pick and choose. Uh, I'm like, do I really want to watch this today? And that's actually how I felt about Payback. I was like,
Mm,
do I really want to watch it today? No, I think I could skip it. And if I want to watch it, I'll watch it later on. I'll watch it another day, whatever the case may be. So you probably that's probably the best answer I could give when it comes to burnout, because it's a real thing.
yeah,
When I
definitely.
noticed it WrestleMania week, I noticed that I was like, wow, that's a lot of stuff. That's a lot of shows to watch. Because
Mm,
what we do too during WrestleMania week, we're doing we're doing the preview shows because we do a lot of preview shows. We do preview shows and we do review shows. So you're talking about like within WrestleMania week when that happens, like the weekend and all that stuff, we do about 17 to 18 videos within 7 or 8 days. That's a lot. That's a lot of content right there.
mm,
So sometimes, like same thing. I when it comes to WrestleMania week, I usually pick and choose. I'm like, all right, am I available this day? Do I really want to watch it? Nah, I'm okay. Because also on top of that, the factor too is work. I have a regular
mm.
job. So
Yeah.
a lot of stuff happens, at least when I come home, a lot of stuff happens. But sometimes I'm just tired. And I'm like, I'll skip it tonight, or whatever the case may be. The only real commitments that I make is the like I said, the real commitments that I make is Monday and Wednesday. That's usually the days where I'm like, all right, I'm here tonight, and I'm gonna do it, whatever the case may be.
Mm. I understand what you're saying completely there. You talk about making the commitments there. What about on the days you've made the commitments and you're like, I don't want to watch Raw, or you're burned out from just being a content creator and your real job? How do you sort of stay committed to watch the shows that you have to watch and do the content that you have to do?
I would say probably the team that we have. Usually, if I'm hearing like, "Hey, we're gonna have more people join in," or the case may be, that helps a lot too, because then there's somebody there who could have a conversation. We can have a certain debate on certain things, whatever happens on the show, and it's like, oh, was that the right thing they did? It kind of gets the time going, and I think that also helps a lot because there's been a lot of Monday Night Raws where we have certain people on and we're like having a great discussion about anything, and then all of a sudden it's 10 o'clock and we're like, wow, we only have an hour left, and then an hour makes it easier for us. So usually that's usually the best way I try to deal with it, because there's a lot of times where I'm I'm like that, but then I'm like, you know what, we're gonna have this person on and that person on. Usually just having the guys basically, wrestling terms, carry me. That's probably the
I
best
know
way I
what
could
you
say.
mean.
Like, yeah. So, yeah, I would say more of that. Like that really helps. Like just having the team that we have, that really helps.
That's very, very cool, my friend. So before we do the segment that I call generic questions, I am curious to know, you talked about the fact that you and SP3 didn't see eye to eye originally when it came to you first joining True Hill Heat and things like that. But what you, in my opinion, and you can disagree, SP3 is one of the best podcasters out there currently. And so I'm curious to know, have you learned anything from him when it comes to podcasting?
Yeah, actually, yeah. One of the things that I learned from SP3 is not only the commitment that he makes, but being a host. It's one of those things where it's not for everybody.
Hmm?
So what he really does is like he really does his homework. So if there's anything that's going on, like again, like any notes or any reports that are going on, he usually writes them down. He keeps everything on track. Uh, there's actually what we do too. Um, is that there's he usually gives us a heads up of what we're covering. um, and I know we were doing that for a while as well. Like he would send us like an agenda, basically, like, hey, we're doing this first, we're doing that first, and then we're gonna talk about this, and this is how we're gonna end the show. That's probably one of the things that I learned. I'm like, damn, like it's a lot of work, you know. But if you want your content to be, you know, consistent, you know, to have a real structure, I think that's one of the best ways to do it. Because I've noticed too with a lot of other podcasts, same thing. Like they're kind of, I don't want to say they're all over the place, but sometimes they kind of go away from that. So I think
Tangent.
those things are important. Yeah. So like those things are important. Like what he does is like he does like a roll call. He gives a shout outs to like the most people who contributed to the group. He gives a shout outs to all the Patreon members, you know, and stuff like that. And that's when he gets into like the big news or whatever, like big discussion that's gonna happen. He usually starts that off early, like when we start talking about it. That's probably the main thing I've learned from him when it comes to podcasting about like, hey, you want to take this seriously, you really got to do your homework. And if something important happens, you got to make sure you jot everything down. You know, you actually have like a real agenda when it comes to that.
That's very, very cool. So, as we look at wrapping this up, Joshua, we're going to do a segment that I call generic questions. Those of you that have seen my interviews before will know this where I ask my guests the questions they might be asked on social media, such as Joshua's favorite match, favorite overall pay-per-view card, such as Double or Nothing 2019, favorite wrestler's theme song, favorite tag team, and favorite wrestler. Basically, questions he might be asked on social media. So now he'll have a place to be like, guys, I have answered this. Please go watch this. So, what's your favorite
Yeah.
match of all time?
Favorite match in general, like of all
Yep,
time.
yep.
Hmm. My favorite match of all time. It actually happened a couple years ago. I would say Kenny Omega versus Okada at a Dominion, the 2 out of 3 falls match.
Ooh.
That was like it's one of those things that their whole entire rivalry was fantastic. Even that first matchup they had at Wrestle Kingdom was great. That basically put Kenny on the map. For people
Mm.
who didn't know Kenny Omega, that was the first matchup that put him on the map. But what made this one so special was that not only it went a little over an hour, but the storytelling behind it. There was like, you know, the back and forth. They also how they made Kenny's finisher, the One Wing Angel, how they made it important. Because if you really watch that rivalry, um, the first matchup, he didn't even do it.
Mm.
He didn't even hit his finisher, and they made it so important that every time Kenny did it, Okada never really kicked out. He either grabbed the rope or he didn't kick out,
He
and
just flicked
that
his
was kind
foot
of the
on the
story they were
rope, if
telling
I
with
remember
it.
one of the matches.
Yeah, yeah, that was about it. It like and then yeah. So when it comes to the 2 out of 3 falls match, I thought like uh that was that was a fantastic way to end it. But then also Kenny winning the IWGP title. That was, you know, one of those moments that I was so excited as a fan. Not only somebody that's following wrestling in a different aspect now, but as a fan, you're like legit excited about.
That's very, very cool. What about your favorite overall pay per view card?
Pay per view, I might be biased for this because I attended this show. I would probably say the first All In. I thought
Ooh.
that was like a special night. That was a very special night. I actually traveled for that. Um, to not realize how important it was. Like I already knew it was important, but to actually be there and then actually to witness and then realize how important that night was, I would probably go with All In.
That's very, very cool. What about your favorite wrestler's entrance theme?
Entrance theme.
Yeah.
Uh, I might go with Cody Rhodes' Kingdom, because I was always into that song even before he got popular for WWE. When I noticed it, like he had the band Downstate, even he contacted them and he had them do his song for like the independent scene, and that's basically been his theme ever since.
Mm.
I'll probably go with that because I'm constantly either listening to that either once or twice a day, or like I'm listening to that every day at least once.
That's very, very cool. What about your favorite tag team?
Favorite tag team, probably Young Bucks. I think
Mm,
that's the stuff that they've been able to do. I know they get like this general take from everybody. Oh, they only do 20 super kicks a match or whatever the case may be. Or they only do flippy stuff. But if you really watch their matches like especially the last several years, I would probably go with them just because they're constantly putting out banger at the banger matches. It's I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think they get enough credit when it comes to like the bigger casual fan aspect of things because
mm,
everyone they tend to go with like what this person says, so that's what everyone thinks they do. Because I have
mm,
friends like that. I have friends they tell me, "Oh, the Young Bucks, all they do is super kicks," but then they admit to me they've never seen the Young Bucks match. So it's like, how can you give a take on certain things if you don't watch?
mm. I understand what you're saying completely there. And then finally, as we wrap this up, Joshua, who is your favorite overall wrestler?
Favorite overall wrestler? I would. It's probably. I would say, as a kid growing up, it was definitely Steve Austin. I loved the stuff that he did, and I think he was a better wrestler than a lot of people give him credit for.
Mm,
In my opinion, if you really watch his stuff, he actually got better as he got older. Even with the injuries that he was dealing with, he kind of knew what he had to do, like what he was capable of doing. And I think he gets he's better than he gets credit for when it comes to actual ring performer. Um, I could easily say Bret Hart as well because he was
mm,
probably the main wrestler. Like when you talk about being a kid and he was probably the first person that I noticed. Like, wow, this guy looks cool because I was always like the glasses and the ring gear, but then also like his stuff in the ring, he was really good. He was somebody I think he was ahead of his time.
mm.
Um, but right now, currently, I will probably say, hmm, right now, currently, I probably will go with Will Ospreay. I think he's
Ooh,
been very impressive with a lot of stuff that he's changed. Because remember, when he came up, he was he was big on these huge
bump.
spots.
Mm,
Um, a lot of people never really, I don't want to say people took him seriously, but people didn't really look at him as a great wrestler because they saw it as more like gymnastics or whatever the case may be. But now as you see like his growth and stuff that he's changed, right? He's changed his size, he's gotten bigger. Um Knowing that he's getting older, so there's a lot of stuff he can't do. He's changed up his style to the point that I think he's even a better wrestler now than he was 5 or 6 years ago. And the constant stuff that he's doing is like, oh my god. Especially when you hear like every time he's having like a 5.5 star match or a 6 star match, and you actually watch and you actually witnessed it. You actually understand. All right, this is why he got 6 stars.
mm. Yeah, definitely. I fully agree with what you're saying there. And that's very cool. So, as we wrap this up, the question I end all my interviews on is I believe as podcasters with social media, YouTube, and things like that in general, we're all sort of going to live forever in some sort of very strange way if you think about the world. So, what is one piece of content you're like, I'd love to be remembered for that? And then what is one that you're like, yuck, please get rid of that?
That's a good wow, that's a good question. Um I guess in general, the one piece of content I would love for people to in general, I would say is that at least every time I'm coming on to a stream or whatever the case may be, they know that they're getting real take from me. You know,
Mm,
I do my best to give actual takes to how I feel at the moment. Sometimes I like to play around. I like to entertain. So sometimes I can amp it up. Um, but I would probably say, just in general, I would say because a lot of stuff that I've done, I don't really have that many regrets on certain things, to be honest with you. But I think in general, it's just a general aspect that I want people if I'm coming on, I want them to know like whatever you're getting, this is probably what you're gonna get in person. Like if I'm giving a tough take on something, this is what I'm gonna say even outside of streaming, of outside of YouTube, whatever case you want to call it. Something that I would regret. Something I would regret is I don't want people to think I hate everything.
Oh
Because
yeah.
there's sometimes I could be critical on certain things. I can nitpick on certain things, and I know that for myself. So I want people to understand, like, if there's something that I dislike, it's not because I hate it, or whatever the case may be. If I'm not saying it, then that's what that means. But I think there's certain things where I think you could be very transparent on certain things, or like if there's something that's going on in general that you could give your take, you could give your honest opinion on certain things. I don't think it means you hate it. I just think it's just your take on things. It doesn't mean you have to agree with it. The person could disagree. I think that's okay for the most part. But that's one thing I'll probably say. Like, I wouldn't want people to think that that if there's certain things I don't like, doesn't mean I take it to that level of hatred or the case may be.
Hmm. I fully understand what you're saying there. So, as we wrap this up, obviously, I want to say thank you to Joshua for a great conversation. But promote yourself. Where can the good people find you, your work, etc.?
You can find me on social medias, mostly Instagram. I like using Instagram more. You can find me there at jmpunk321. On X, the same name, jmpunk321. You can find me on the Chill Hill Heat channel, on YouTube. I'll be on tonight as well for the well, I mean not tonight, but for Monday Night Raw, I'll be on for that. And then Dynamite, that's one that I do. Yeah, but besides that, and then also you can also check out my artwork. I usually do a lot of art stuff. There's actually one that I actually wanted to show you that I have
Oh,
up. Is Brian Danielson. It was one that I got signed. So I also do like a lot of artwork. So that was one that I did
oh
of him,
wow. Oh
and I actually got
wow.
that autograph. Yeah, I got that autograph by him. So
That's very, very cool.
thank you. So yeah, so you can check out a lot of my work there as well. That's usually what I do on my side stuff, like my side gig. I've been an artist for 27 years, so that's one of the things that I've been doing as well. So if people want to check out my work, they could go there as well.
It's well worth doing, guys. I feel like I say this a lot. One of the probably the hardest working creators in this content space, but one of the nicest as well. So if you guys like this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to Tom Talks Fresh on YouTube. Follow me on Twitter, LX, as Joseph said, or at Tom Talks Fresh, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye now.